Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, this one is going up 2 days before Thanksgiving here in the U.S., 2022 for you time travelers out there. And in past years, I kind of took Thanksgiving week off from work, or at least I would try to really downshift a lot. It would let me recharge and maybe take care of some creative stuff and go out on hikes and all that sort of thing. But honestly, Monday had 4 business calls scheduled, plus recording the conversation you're about to listen to. Today's got more mop-up work and posting the show, as I'm doing now, and driving my neighbor out to the airport. So I suspect I'm not going to get as much decompression time as I'd like. Still, it's not like I'm, involved in back-breaking manual labor or something. It's a white-collar job. We'll just put it that way, even if I haven't worn a collar in a long time. Anyway, as I mentioned, I recorded today's podcast yesterday. It did come together in a hurry. My guest is David Sachs, who has a new book out now called The Future is Analog: How to Create a More Human World. It's from Public Affairs Books, and it sort of expands on David's 2016 book, The Revenge of Analog. The Future is Analog. It's this really illuminating examination of what we've learned from the pandemic period, especially the lockdowns we've undergone. And David goes into various aspects of our lives and the shortfalls that occurred when we were just collectively thrust into the digital-only world, beginning in spring of 2020. And over the course of the book, he really, counters the promise of remote learning and telecommuting and all the other virtual lifestyles with the reality of the past few years and our increasing sense of burnout and stress, and that degree of what's lacking when we can't just get together and do things in person. And rather than just highlight the crappiness of these past few years, he explores some of the analog options, some of the real world things that we need to get back to, and how they can help us achieve more balance and happier lives, even in the face of crises like especially the initial phase of COVID. And he does this by weaving his personal experience, especially helping with his kids' schooling, taking up surfing in Toronto, of all places, rediscovering the joys of Shabbat and challah making, holding a book club, which he does virtually and then outdoors in winter, again, in Toronto, for example. But he weaves those things together with interviews with a ton of experts in a variety of fields. And it all coheres into a really strong argument in favor of, balancing our digital tools with, lived human experience. And David takes pains to point out, both in the book and in our conversation, he's no Luddite. He's not looking for an off-ramp from the modern or postmodern world. But, he does stress that there's more to life than looking at screens, and that we miss a lot when we're not in person and when we're not having face-to-face conversations, and we're not going to a store and talking to the clerks and getting advice rather than just clicking on Amazon links. We're not hanging out with friends and schoolmates. I think it's a really good book, and one that I think helps to remind us of what's human and what we're inadvertently giving up, and how we need to reclaim certain, the real estate of our lives, I guess, not surrender everything to some, metaverse idea of how we can do everything from our sofa, but not really get human contact. Now, so that's The Future is Analog from Public Affairs Books. It's out now by David Sachs. Go read it. Go get it. I just want to give the caveat that I kind of ramble on a lot near the end. I thought about editing it out. And if we'd been recording this in person, I'd have been able to read David's body language and see how bored, he was getting and cut that stuff short. But, them's the perils of the virtual world, I guess, which proves David's point. We were supposed to record last week in person when he was going to be in New York City, but that got postponed and bumped into the virtual world for reasons we'll go into pretty early on in this conversation. Now, here's David's bio from the book. David Sachs is a writer, reporter, and speaker who specializes in business and culture. His book, The Revenge of Analog, was a #1 Washington Post bestseller, was selected as one of Michiko Kakutani's top 10 books of 2016 for the New York Times, and has been translated into 6 languages. He is also the author of 4 other books: Save the Deli, which won a James Beard Award, The Soul of an Entrepreneur, The Tastemakers, and his latest book, The Future is Analog, How to Create a More Human World. He lives in Toronto. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with David Sachs. Tell me about the origins of this one and how it relates to your 2016 Revenge of the Analog.
Well, the origins of this are sort of what I was hearing about.
COVID?
Pardon?
COVID.
COVID in a way. I mean, it was interesting. I was sort of thinking about something around this even prior to COVID. I was surprised at the resonance of The Revenge of Analog, and especially how global it was. Like it was translated into a number of different languages. It became a bestseller in South Korea. I was constantly doing interviews and even talks with different people around the world who were asking about, the phenomenon of analog and its resurgence. And they were interested in, records and film and so on. But there were these sort of deeper questions as, again, this dominant narrative around digital kind of capturing the future was still there in the media around, which companies we should be following and who are the sort of cultural leaders and where were things going and where should institutions invest and so forth. And I was kind of the countervailing voice to this. And then obviously things came to a head in spring of 2020 because overnight we were all thrust or plopped, as it were, into this digital future, right? That this predicted future where everything would be remote and everyone would work from home and all we would need would be accessed through the internet and our screens. And that's what had been predicted for years or decades, even depending on what it was, suddenly was true for everyone, everywhere. And it kind of brought the reality of that to the forefront. It was no longer this theoretical thing. So we were all living this version of the digital future. And at least I personally found it to be horrible. And not just because I was like Mr. Analog. I think it was an experience that most people I knew shared, that there were parts of it that maybe they enjoyed. Maybe a lot of people didn't like having to commute to work. And this was an improvement upon it. But for the most part, this great unease we were feeling at being stuck inside and tethered to our screens hinted at something deeper. And that's the sort of theme that I had been touching on with the first book, but had been talking about and thinking about for a while. So it just sort of emerged out of that. It was like these were the questions that I was already asking myself and what I was addressing in different interviews. And maybe there was a way to sort of unpack what we had been learning in that time and reflect on what it showed about what we want for the future and the role analog has to play in the future.
And how'd you settle on the structure of the book? You break it out over 7 days, metaphorically, and you cover, I've got them written down here, work, school, commerce, the city, culture, conversation, and soul. How did that gestate, or where the structure crystallized for you?
My wife.
Yeah,
it was her brilliant idea. Lauren, you get all the credit. I was, I had the idea of the different topics because it was like, well, what are the parts of my life that I'm now having to live through a screen? Like, what are the things that previously were done in an analog format, out in the world, physically in places, face to face, with people, and I sort of identified maybe a couple of them. 6 or 7 or 8. And she's like, well, what, think about it like the days of the week, on Monday you're going here, on Tuesday, like think about the places you're going. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea, because it just sort of frames it in a way, which I think made sense, because in that time, especially in the sort of spring of 2020, when everybody was kind of locked in, time did lose kind of all sense of place and meaning, deprived of the analog spaces and relationships that would mark the times of the day and the days of the week. Everything just kind of blurred into this mush. And I think that that was a common experience that most people had. And that was a real untethering. And so it seemed natural to approach it from that framework.
We should point out, and I may end up mentioning it in the introduction, but I will note that I came across you in the book via Twitter. I read it as a PDF, and we're recording this virtually instead of face-to-face, which I should also ask, how's COVID treating you? Because we were going to do face-to-face, but you tested positive the day before. The
irony of writing this book about the sort of beginning of the pandemic and the experience of going through it, never getting COVID the entire time until the day my book comes out, and having to cancel, part of my U.S. East Coast book tour has not been lost on me. Physically, I had one day when I was kind of sick, and the rest of it's just been like the residuals of a cold. I'm back in the world today. I'm doing an event tonight in Toronto. But yeah, shitty timing. Let's just call it that, Gil. And yes, I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in New York last Thursday. So yeah. But, I think this is the thing, right? Like, I am not some analog Luddite monk who's like, I will only meet people face to face. I've done tons of great podcasts and had wonderful conversations over the past few weeks with people all over the world. And I'm really thankful for the technology to allow me to do that, as well as allow me to write this book and interview people all over the world while I was stuck at home, and, edit and write it on Microsoft Word, which is what I've been using for 20 something years. I'm not, a messianic, sort of analog Taliban, as it were.
Yeah, it's
a free book.
Well, in the before time, I only recorded in person, and there was actually a pitch. One cartoonist was pitching me to another one at a festival, and the guy said, "Well, I'm in Chicago. Do you do these remotely?" And I said, "No, it's really two people sitting at a table, talking to each other, looking at each other, and not looking at a screen the whole time." And this guy's smile just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because he realized, oh my God, this guy gets, the whole thing and what we lose. And that's been my biggest change. Like you said, the benefit is, I get to record. Sometimes, I would travel for work and I would set up podcasts around those things. But being able to do this remotely, it's not as good as in person, but it opens up the room for conversation with people I just would never get to see otherwise. So, it's that middle way thing that you talk about.
But it's true, right? This is not the real deal. This is the knockoff Kirkland version of the conversation. Nothing wrong with Kirkland. Sometimes the products are better, but if you and I were meeting face to face, as we were supposed to in New York, the conversation would be very different. It would be, inflected by the physicality of our presence, and that would determine the pace of conversation, the direction of it, the energy of it. Now I just have the sound of your voice. You just have the sound of my voice. The visual thing that I'm looking at is my computer screen and my desk and the crap around it and a wall, right? And I'm mostly just looking at the black screen, which I've turned off. But I'm kind of, just focusing on the words coming out of my mouth. I'm not looking at you. I'm not looking at, your body language and your face and the way you're reacting to me. And it's fine. It's working, but it's not the same.
And so what was I'd say the gestation for you then, the prompt, I guess, that really led you to, this really is not working out for human beings. The sequel essentially needs to be written. Was there a crystallizing moment for you during this that it was just, oh my God, we're really not thriving in this scenario?
I think it was the cumulative effect of months of it, and just the general disenchantment that I was hearing from people. It was like, when can we get past this? People were like talking about desiring to go back to the office, or begging to go back to kids begging to go back to school. Obviously there were things like restaurants and movies and comedy clubs. Like those are the fun things. But even when people are like, oh my God, I just want to like go to a service at a church, and not particularly religious people. It's like, okay, something's sort of missing. And this disenchantment showed that the future that we had been promised was failing us. So I I had an op-ed, I guess, in the New York Times. It came out in must have been around Thanksgiving 2020. I think that was the impetus for it, that I wrote that, and it, I sent that to the publisher. I'm like, well, maybe this is something. Like maybe this is the book here, because I'd been toying around with other ideas.
And had you been noting other changes since 2016? Are there things that are independent of COVID, I guess, and the impact of this that also showed that, the analog virtual split is getting weirder and weirder, and either we need to reclaim certain aspects of our lives, or this is a wave that was already coming on?
I think there was excuse me. There was this sort of growing.
I feel so bad about the COVID thing, man. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's like the residual throat clearance.
Yeah.
There was this, I think, growing disenchantment with Silicon Valley and sort of everything that it represented and everything it was sort of selling. That had really been, I'd been on the fringes of in 2016. Like there were not as many people speaking out about it, or sort of taking that narrative and questioning it at the time. I was in DC last week doing my event with Cal Newport, and him and I were talking at dinner afterward. I didn't give him COVID. He's tested many times. There you go, Cal. Got a hell of an immune system. And he said, when we were first doing this, 5-6 years ago, there were very, very few books like this. And now you see this sort of stem of criticism come, and it came from all sorts of different directions, from sort of the cost to the economy and workers and human rights, from areas, what Amazon had been doing, and the gig economy, and, the cost to democracy with Cambridge Analytica and Brexit and everything that had happened, in all over the world, post-Trump, and Facebook, and just how the destruction of sort of the civic discourse. And so I think it went beyond the sort of physical goods that I was looking at mostly with Revenge of Analog, and got into this deeper area, and this growing discontent was really something that was palpable. I was writing about it in my last book, which was called The Soul of an Entrepreneur, that came out in April 2020. And that book looked at the sort of broken model of Silicon Valley's, hero worship entrepreneurship, the same thing that fed the deification of someone like Elizabeth Holmes or Adam Newman, or, Sam Bankman-Fried, our latest fallen genius angel this past week. That whole world was already being doubted. The narrative of sort of Silicon Valley is this endless force for good, which you can make money and change the world for the better. Like that had been fading already in people's in the eyes of the public. We were seeing the consequences of what giving ourselves over entirely to sort of digital as the arbiter of the future was doing. And then I think the pandemic it forced everyone to look at it in their own lives. It forced us into a sort of test drive. It's like, all right, here you go. Everybody's living the digital future now. Wherever you are in the world, this is it. So what did that look like, right? And how did people react? And I think there's few people, they exist, but there's very few people who are like, this is great. This is awesome. This is how I want to live the rest of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm in that boat. You know, I get this actually benefited, small percentage of people, but really, we could see I would say psychoses, to be harsh, developing in people the longer we spend, kind of losing contact with everyone. And I want to acknowledge,
because I have gotten criticism from, there are people who, for example, with disabilities, right, for whom this opened up a world of opportunities to see things, communicate with people that they were limited by physical barriers. And that I want to acknowledge that as a genuine thing, or people who felt like their voices weren't heard and were heard. But I don't think that moving things into a sort of remote, disembodied sphere is the way to address that. The way to address that is to build more accessible spaces for people, right? The way to address racial, gender, economic inequality in workplaces or education is not to say, okay, well, everybody's going to work from a screen because that's equal. Because those inequalities just get transferred to the screen. You saw that with education. It's to fight to make those spaces more inclusive to everyone, because everyone benefits from being in those spaces in some way.
Yeah, one of the things that really came to the fore for me, reading this simultaneously as the whole Twitter meltdown, reading your book, as the Twitter meltdown was happening, really kind of put a cap on the Silicon Valley guys may not really have a clue as to what human behavior is like and what people actually need and want.
You are.
It really did kill me, this idea that you just don't get what people use Twitter for. And it's usually dunking on people like you. I don't know why you'd spend that amount of money just so you could be, the center of this. But yeah, people, people make a lot of money and they kind of, everybody lives in their cocoons and silos, I guess. But, they can get more destructive as things go along. I was happy that right at the end of the book, the Facebook into Meta announcement happened and you were able to sort of incorporate the Zuckerberg idea that we're all going to be legless holograms in each other's worlds while sitting on our sofas and dying of heart disease. But yeah, it's a weird mentality. As somebody, I'm 51, so I was raised on cyberpunk fiction from like my teen years onwards. And the idea that Neil Stephenson was giving a proscriptive idea of what the world should be like is really just one of the most incredible misreadings of science fiction literature I could imagine.
This is what you should, I write about E.M. Forster's novella or short story, The Machine Stops, right? Where it's like people live in these underground cocoons and they have everything brought to them by the all-knowing machine. It's like, that's not, this is dystopian. There is a fine line between the utopianism and dystopianism. I talk about a little bit in the book, the 1993 blockbuster Demolition Man. You
go into it several times. Actually, I have a note here. All in on Demolition Man, huh?
Let's get into it, right? 1990. It's 1996. No, what is it? When does it take place?
Oh, I forget. I have to look it up.
1996 super cop John Spartan is frozen in time to go into thawed in the future to take down Simon Phoenix, played by Wesley Snipes, Stallone v. Snipes. And it's amazing because it's like, it is this sort of time machine, on the above ground world of the future. You have San Angeles, the sort of digital utopian future city where swearing is outlawed and sex is outlawed, and everybody wears these like spacesuit like uniforms and drive around these electric cars, and the only restaurant is Taco Bell that survived the fast food wars, and the only music or commercial jingles, and everything's like clean and perfect and beautiful in this kind of like Le Corbusier city. And then underground are like the analog rebels led by Dennis Leary, who like drive around in old Oldsmobiles and eat flame grilled rat burgers. And the line between utopia and dystopia is not finite.
I will note he does get, I'm looking it up online right now. It gets frozen in 96.
Yeah.
The movie takes place in 2032.
Yeah.
So, we only have 10 years to prepare for Stallone and Snipes to really
buy those Taco Bell shares, everyone.
But,
I put my money on Cinnabon, to be honest.
Yeah, true. They got the scent, it's people just get wafting. It also reminds me, of course, of Idiocracy in its own way. Yes. But the Mike Judge, which Fox wisely decided to submarine and not show in any theaters so they could, pretend the movie never happened. But yeah.
And then build it.
Pop culture.
And then Fox helped build it in reality.
Yeah. While they were actually, engineering Idiocracy, they were, downplaying the parody of it. But yeah, it's that notion of, again, what the technology can be, the positive benefits of it, and then this need to just, jack everything up to, and this can take over the whole world, have to push things, which I guess is a function of venture capital or capital itself, that it needs to push this dominating mold on the world, instead of coming up with, as I like to put it, a life of extreme moderation, where, we keep everything within limits. This is a nice benefit to have, but yesterday I was driving 80 minutes each way out to the Poconos to sit down with someone just to record in person and have a little time spent with, some face-to-face conversation. I'm very sympathetic to the book, and I'm troubled about where things have been headed and what it's actually going to mean for us. All of this with the caveat of, I don't have kids. So the whole school thing and everything else, I'm like, I understand everybody's under a lot more pressure than I am if you're actually trying to raise children in this environment between pandemic and, everything we're being pushed towards in terms of standardization, technology, etc. Less of a question, more of a rambling rant, but you did mention Dennis Leary earlier, so.
Okay. You got to be hyped up.
Yeah. See, the thing that I wondered about, as somebody from Toronto, for you, knowing that things like Brexit and Trump were at least partially socially engineered and, had a malicious intent behind them, do you feel like, there's even less of an excuse for Rob Ford?
Oh, God. I mean, he was...
You can't even say, there was a huge conspiracy to get him in there. Like, people actually just voted.
Yeah. Listen, it's. I mean, I don't want to ascribe too much to the fault of digital technology. We've had demagogues and authoritarian leaders and mob ideas and misinformation in the analog world. The Nazis.
This just
the Nazis
weaponized or streamlined
just fine without Twitter. Like they really, Goebbels was the king of analog. They did okay with that. So I think it's an amplifier, right? It's an amplifier of these forces, and it tends to amplify things more often in a negative sense, especially social media.
It struck me, there's a line you had, I made a note on page 44, which I guess is probably the second chapter. It must have been in the school area. With digital technology, friction is always the enemy and speed is always the answer, but the end result has been distraction and burnout. And that sense that we're on this treadmill where we're allegedly, so much more productive, again, not having commutes and being able to schedule all these meetings, et cetera. And yet nothing seems to get done. You did manage to get a book out of all this, which I also consider an achievement, but still.
Yeah, it's, I think it gets at this thing, which economists call the productivity paradox. And it's, a particular obsession in American economics for the past 30, 40 years. And it's like, well, we've had this digital revolution, which is in many ways the equivalent of what the Industrial Revolution is in terms of the way it's transformed our society and our economy and created whole new industries and transformed really every single aspect of life in a modern economy, right? In many ways. But the measure of productivity has been flatlined. Why is that, despite being able to do more? And it gets at what, my friend Cal Newport has written about, which is this fundamental misunderstanding of what productivity is in a digital economy, right? And we keep thinking that it's just, what we just need is something to be able to do the work faster. but that doesn't actually make you work more productively. It just makes you work more, right? All of a sudden you can work around the clock. There is no limit to the amount of messages you can receive, the messages you can send, the amount of information that you can bring in and out. You're limitless in it. And in the limitlessness of that, we just get lost and swamped. I think that's the root cause of so much of the disembodied discontent that we had, and have had for years, and sort of really peaked during the transition to work from home, for example.
What's the response been like? I know the book's just come out, but did you have early or advanced response?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a mix. It's a mix. Yeah. And I have found that it's been rather binary. Like, people are like, yes, I totally get this, I love it, or like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And there hasn't been as much in the middle, which is interesting. And I think it speaks to, people's own perceptions of of their own lives, of digital technology, of their own circumstances. This is a very personal book. I wrote it from my own perspective. It's not a objective, journalistic sort of look. I mean, I'm making an argument. And so people are either going to get it or they're not. It's going to resonate with them or it's not. So, yesterday I had a wonderful NPR, weekend edition interview and segment about the book. And then, the New York Times review was it was like a diss track. It's like, what are you talking about, Mom?
Depending on who it's written by, could be, a positive in that respect. It's not the book for everyone. Right. And that's okay. Like, if it makes people upset and if they have feelings for it, good. That's what I want. I want people to think. I want them to think critically about these things. And not everyone's going to agree, because everyone's experience is different. And that I think is the ultimate thing that I want, people to reflect on, is like, human beings have vastly different experiences, and we require vastly different, very fluid, constantly evolving solutions and environments to, work and create and live and connect in. And sometimes that might be digital and sometimes that might be analog, but, all of one sort of vision of thing, one sort of overarching view of the future, something like the metaverse, is just so wildly insufficient for our varied way that we like to communicate and live and interact with the world. Sure. And I will say, when you bring up the differing ranges of experience, to me, the idea that COVID actually stopped you from doing more work with improv, I took as a positive. But then I realized to you that
I was heading
I'm sorry, I just had to make an improv joke.
I was heading there.
Yeah.
I was ready.
That
was it. Just,
as someone said, nobody gets hurt in improv except the audience.
Yeah.
But anyway, again, we have different takes and different interpretations. But no, I kid. But I mean, even to me, that was one of the. Well, I'll just say, my experience with live entertainment has diminished, for the last 20 plus years, just because of the hassle aspect of it all. And I realized, to other people, this matters a lot. And just because it isn't as important to me doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And again, as you talked about watching Hamilton on screen on Disney Plus when it came out, it was a nice simulacrum of the experience, but not anything like being in the audience and being part of this resonant thing.
Yeah, and everyone's thing's going to be different, right? I'm not a huge sports fan, and so the idea of like paying, out of my own pocket, like $400 to take one of my kids, to like a Toronto Maple Leafs game or a Raptors game. Maybe it'd be like $600. An absurd amount of money, to me, is insane. And yet I know that, like, there's nothing beats going to a real game, right? The World Cup starts this week in the blood-soaked sands of Qatar, and Canada's playing for the first time in 35 years. And like, it's great to go to a bar and see the game and cheer in your own country. But like, I can't even imagine what it's like to go to somewhere like, a real World Cup match. It must be this incredible once in a lifetime experience. And so, for someone that matters a ton. To go to a cricket match, but to me, it's like, oh God, okay. So not my jam, not my cup of tea.
Understandable. Right. But yeah, it's I again, this is all 20 years ago when I'd actually attend these things, but being at a New Jersey Nets playoff game that, they almost lost and got to the next round, et cetera, was this thing of having this joint experience of 20,000 people. In my case, it was 19,999 people and me, because something happened 3 seconds before the end of regulation that I knew the Nets were about to blow a lead and go to overtime. Everybody else, just being Nets fans, were still cheering. I was already sitting down with my hands covering my face because I knew Reggie Miller was about to bomb a 3-pointer and send this to overtime. He did. And then everybody else joined me in that sense of resignation and loss. But we won the game ultimately and got on to the next round.
True fan.
Oh, yeah. There was that instance of, I was a Knick fan before this. I know exactly what's going to happen. He's going to get the pass and boom, we're going to go into overtime and somehow lose this game. But anyway, that's, again, that communal experience. And to me, that's it's the toughest thing about the pandemic and about our different responses to it. That sense of just getting back to being around people. I mean, my first instances of it were work related, going back to trade shows and conferences with people and being masked up for the most part. And it's still just getting that muscle memory back of, okay, this is what it's like to just shoot the breeze with somebody at their trade show stand and not have to schedule a Zoom, not have a deliberate reason we're getting together, and just let the looseness of conversation happen. Much in the same way of doing it with the podcast. It's as you've pointed out, it's really weird to have that disjunction where everything got cut off and then we had to kind of feel our way back into a social intersecting world again.
But I think maybe the first few times there was like a kind of odd energy, but I feel like it was, for me at least, in one of those instances, like there was this sort of euphoria to it. Even the first time I went back to a grocery store shopping for groceries with my mask on, I was like trying to chat to everybody, and I was just like, oh my God, I can feel the oranges, it's who we've evolved to be. That's our natural state of being. Looking in front, looking at light coming through flat pieces of glass is not our natural state of being. We have not evolved over the course of 300,000 years of Homo sapienity to do that. And I think we forgot that truth. And it took this to sort of remind us of it. Like, why does this feel so bad? Oh, because it's unnatural. It's unnatural to spend so much of your life doing this. And so if this is the future that we're supposed to inherit, according to, our messianic trilogy of, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, then, this is not a future that I'm signing up for.
Right. But for my part, I'm pretty sure I'd be the guy who gets nausea from those VR glasses anyway. So, I'm going to be cut out of that reality as is. Yeah. But, I did want to point out when you mentioned that the book it's not journalism, it's more personal. You are still, it's filled with interviews with other people, or at least, commentary from experts in other fields and sources, including Dr. Ruth, which I was so happy to see. But, it's not as though this is my personal take book. I mean, you are bringing in, expert perspectives and viewpoints throughout. Yeah.
I did some 200 plus interviews for this. I didn't leave my house. I didn't go, this was written in kind of the heart of the pandemic when here in Ontario and Canada, we were still pretty restricted in where we could go. My kids were home from school. The border was closed pretty much for non-essential travel. So, that limited what I was able to do. But I definitely wanted to seek the experiences of of people and expertise. And even that was somewhat limiting. Like it was limiting to, you get different perspectives when you're just able to talk to people on the phone or online. You don't you don't get that sort of broader thing that you would if you were out in the world or out in the community.
So what did you learn from the interviews and from the writing process, from where you started and what you thought the thesis was going to be into what the book became?
I think that the main thing that I take away from it are two insights about the future. And one is that, in the future, digital technology is going to continue evolving in new, incredible, unforeseen, maybe scary, maybe wonderful ways that, some of it we are seeing the beginning of with the growth of artificial intelligence capabilities and other things that we don't even know. Right. And that's going to continue onward and onward as, as computers get smarter and smaller and faster, and Moore's law continues its sort of straight projection of acceleration. And the other thing is that, no matter how much that happens, we're still human beings. We're still flesh and blood creatures on this earth, and we have analog needs. And if those needs aren't met, if they're not the sort of center of the way we think and plan about the future in whatever aspect of our life it is, then we're going to feel that discontent. We're going to feel lost. We're going to feel disappointed and disassociated. And so the biggest thing I saw is that, like, we're not ditching technology, but I think we really owe it to ourselves to adopt a more critical thinking around the future and around technology, so that we're able to approach technology and judge it on its merits and ask whether it actually improves our analog selves, our lives as humans, the interactions, the spaces, the relationships that really matter to us. And if it does, then great, right? Think of, I don't know, Google Maps. Google Maps is a tool, and it allows you to get to places easier than it did before. But it doesn't take anything away from those places. It doesn't really take much away from the journey. And you have the ability to turn it off when you want to just go on a road trip and get lost somewhere in the countryside or something like that, right? Or you're wandering a city. You don't need to know where you are. Like, you don't have to have it on. You can turn it off. But when you need to get somewhere, it's great for that. But it doesn't get in the way. It doesn't shape, your entire world around it.
Yeah, it's not directing where your destination ultimately.
Exactly. Or working with Microsoft Word to write books and write articles. Like I've done it my entire career. It doesn't take away from the process. For me, other people prefer writing by hand or doing a typewriter. I think that's a measured, thoughtful way to look at technology. And I think if we did more of that, rather than saying, oh, this is the new thing, like, this is the future, this thing's the future, and someone's saying, the future is going to be self-driving cars, and everyone's like, yeah, self-driving cars. How do we completely shift our city infrastructure to self-driving cars? Maybe we should be looking at bike lanes instead. It's a more mature way. It's a grown-up way of thinking about the future, where digital is going to be there, but analog is still going to be the core of who we are and what our life's about.
Yeah, and it just all seems to stem out with the, venture capitalists can't make money from, adding a bunch of bike lanes and city bike and things like that. But
no, and that's the previous book that I wrote, the one that came out in 2020,
and just came out in paperback now. I saw also.
The Soul of an Entrepreneur. I mean, that looks at, how venture capital's financial model really skewed so many of these issues, right? But we shouldn't let the needs of, the Saudi sovereign wealth fund to get a 10% return on an investment dictate our world, right? Yeah. Like, if a business can make money doing something, and there's plenty of businesses out there in the world of technology that actually make profit and build products and do great things that aren't part of this sort of extractive model of capitalism, right? And that's, digital and software and hardware, like, it has the potential to do all sorts of things that serve as tools without delivering this all or nothing vision of the future, or owning the market, or crushing things. And I think that model is already falling because, interest rates are up. They're now competing with bonds, those VC funds. And so many of these companies never made a profit. Like all these meal delivery services, restaurant delivery apps, like they've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars flooding markets and squeezing restaurants and squeezing delivery drivers and pouring money into ads and marketing and free meals. And they still don't turn a profit. It's insane. So that model's broken. And I think we're going to see alternatives to that coming out just out of pure economic necessity.
Do you remember your first time back in a bookstore after lockdown?
Yeah. I mean, even during lockdown, I would go to the door of Type in Toronto here, where I'm having my book launch on Wednesday night. And they had a little thing at the door. You have to wear your mask. You'd tell them what you wanted, and you called your order in ahead of time. The first time I went was Jessica's Book Nook, which is a little bookstore in the small town outside of Toronto where my parents have a house. And Dennis, the owner there, is wonderful. I went in with a mask and signed copies of my new book that he put in the window and sold. So it's wonderful, wonderful feeling. And, I was lucky that in my aborted book tour last week, I did get the first stop in before I ended up getting sick, and had an incredible night at Washington, D.C.'s East City Books, which is in Capitol Hill.
Been there yet.
Yeah. And Lori and the team are just incredible people, and did an event there with Cal Newport. And, there was 40, 50 people who showed up, some of whom I knew, many of whom were strangers, most of whom were there fans of Cal because he's, got a name.
Yeah.
He's a local boy. He's done good. Got a great head of hair. And it was just wonderful. It was wonderful to be back in that sort of environment, seeing people, talk to them, engaging with them on ideas. It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure.
I have to admit, I haven't read him yet. I have a copy of Deep Work on the recommendation of Warren Ellis. And I keep thinking, I need to sit down and read this guy. And because everything in my reading life centers around the podcast, it's always should wait until I've got an in. So consider yourself used now. Find a way to leverage you into sitting down.
Do my best.
But, I'll say among the, I wanted to ask, in the book, in the Soul chapter especially, you sort of go into the process of making challah again after years and years. And for me, the haha analog is, I took up drawing and painting in the last almost 2 years after turning 50, all during this phase. This year, in addition to that, I've been mailing out a postcard every day to someone. Awesome. Yeah. And it's all analog, all the drawing and painting. Early on, my wife was like, are you going to do anything on the iPad? I'm like, why would I do anything on the iPad? This is about, a piece of paper, a pen and pencil, and the eye and the hand. And that's changed my life in terms of just learning how to see. I mean, I live out in the woods, basically. I just started drawing trees in my backyard. And the early ones look like a guy who just suffered a stroke and is regaining function in his hand. But within 3 or 4 weeks, they start looking really good. And it was just it turns out if you just slow down and look at things and try to apprehend them, you can actually get better at doing that and empty your mind.
There's a happy squirrel. We're going to just put a happy little squirrel here, right?
Yeah. But that's the whole vibe, instead of the, and I do have the fro for that, as you've seen.
I had a Bob Ross. I did have a Bob Ross painting day in the band.
Oh yeah. You mentioned that too.
It was, and I still have that. I think one of my kids ripped it up by accident. But it was,
by accident. Sorry, go on.
We all gravitated to these simple pleasures, right? Yeah. We all found so much joy in, home repair and woodworking and
the sourdough cliche,
and jigsaw puzzle sales, shot through the roof, reading, but the book industry was like, oh no, we're done. And they're like, actually, we've never had better quarters. I mean, because we needed a refuge from the screen. And I think that just spoke to our like knee-jerk desire for something different and for variety. And I think that's all it is, right? It's, you know, no one is like, I am getting rid of my internet after this is over. And, you know, I was stuck at home last week because I had COVID. It was like, I watched more streaming crap on TV that I had in months. And I watched some great shows and some movies. I watched some Disney nature documentaries with my kids and Attenborough and like some good stuff. Only Murders in the Building, season 2, to be recommended.
Oh God, not season 2.
You know, not as good as season 1, but still.
We'll just leave it at that and not have a fight.
I'll just any Martin Short. There's like a limitless appetite for that.
Sure.
But
again, Toronto.
But yeah, it's like I'm like, now I'm out. Like, I'm done. I've tapped my limit on that for a while, right? And as a kid, you know, I see my own kids, like they will sit in front of that screen and watch cartoons or whatever for hours. But like even they go crazy after a while and they're bouncing off the walls, literally jumping and like kicking the walls, and they need to go out. And yesterday when my daughter was like cleared and her infection was over, it was like, I called my brother and like, take them somewhere. He like took them to a trampoline, you know, indoor park, and they were just like went bananas. And we're all like that, right? We need that variety. We need balance. And so we need it in our work. We need it in, you know, our school life. We need it in our spiritual life. We need it in our physical life. We need it in our leisure. That's the reason why in Revenge of Analog, you know, people are like, well, why do people want vinyl records when they could stream anything on Spotify? It's like, because they want something different. They want something different than just another thing on their phone. They want a richer experience in addition to this, but not, you know,
solely replacing it.
Yeah, exactly.
My theory was always, because the vinyl thing really took off post-financial crash, and I had this theory that once people had to move again and discovered how heavy all of that vinyl was, they would kind of move back to streaming and digital more. But apparently I was full of crap, and that didn't happen. People still stuck with this as or they haven't moved. They're still stuck in, you know, the places they were 10 years ago. I say this as someone who's lived in the same house for most of my 51 years. So all I do is accumulate books and other stuff and just keep piling up. It's, you know, it's like, it's worth, like, yeah, it sucks on moving day, but like, you're not your 20s. You're not moving every 2 years. And, you know, the reason the vinyl boom started around that time, which is the reason why a lot of these other analog resurgent technologies and hobbies and ideas start, is the digital equivalent suddenly became so easy and ubiquitous that it almost opened people up to accept the analog alternative. And so, you know, the vinyl boom is traced pretty much to the moment when Spotify starts up and streaming becomes this kind of like digital music finally reaches its pinnacle, right? Which is like in the past 10 years or 15 years, you know, since streaming apps like Spotify and Apple Music and whatever other ones are still around, you know, digital music hasn't really changed or improved that much. Like it went from like the CD to the MP3 to, you know, a bunch of like weird apps. And then finally was like, all right, now here's this app. You just play whatever you want. And people were like, okay, this is great. This is all I ever need. Now I'm going to go buy some records. You know, it's like that. But you know what I need? Like a big old piece of plastic spinning around. I just want to listen to this
at RPMs.
Yeah, and not have it change and become, you know, songs related to this.
Yeah, it's like now I want to go deeper, and I'm still going to keep listening to this other music in my car or to find out about things or in the room of my house that doesn't have the turntable. But I want that, and I saw that with all sorts of the other technologies. You know, the growth of instant film cameras really came about when everybody started getting, you know, high quality iPhones and Instagram came out. You know, the Moleskine notebooks and other sort of paper notebooks were really kind of paralleled the rise of, you know, cheap laptops or sort of smaller laptops and tablets. And it was like a parallel tool, a companion tool to be used along with those things. And so I think it's, when new technology comes along and it changes the value of the old technology, which is paraphrasing the great Marshall McLuhan. And I think, we see that now. We see that in all these aspects of our lives. The value of these physical analog spaces, these relationships, it's different to us now, right? The office, if you're someone who went and worked in an office for many years and then spent 2 years working remotely, now to go back into the office, its purpose is different. It's kind of changed. It's elevated in some ways. If it's done correctly, it takes advantage of that. If it's done incorrectly, it squanders it. I've heard of lots of people who drive to their office and sit there in front of their screen and do Zoom meetings with people, some of whom are in the office. It's just okay, this is not the best use of your time or the real estate or money or, ideas.
Yeah, but it's these legacy costs. We're already paying for the office, so you better be here because otherwise, you're draining my money, which is that boss mentality that I've been very thankful. I worked from home for the last 8 years since I launched my trade association.
What is your trade association? What is this day job you have?
I represent a weird subsector of the pharmaceutical industry. I represent guys who are contract manufacturers of drugs and vaccines. So like the printer makes the books for your publisher.
Right.
My guys are that for the drug company. They don't own the IP. They don't own the drug. They just physically manufacture it, and they do other development work.
Not the generic, not the...
They'll make the generics for the generic company,
right.
But they don't sell their own product. Some of them are drug like Pfizer's a member because they also do contract manufacturing for other companies, but I only represent that contract side of their world. My guys were the ones making the Moderna vaccine because Moderna didn't actually have manufacturing capacity because they were more of an R&D play. So a company that's not a member made the bulk vaccine, and another one of my members put it in vials and syringes and helped save the world.
Maybe in my arm? No, I had one AstraZeneca, one Pfizer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, that one worked fine too. But
what difference it makes? I still got COVID last week, but I managed to avoid it for 2.5 years. So.
Right.
I'm thankful for all my vaccines and the companies that brought them.
And AZ and Johnson & Johnson, all those guys, they all used companies like the ones I represent. So it was a very weird first year of the pandemic because I was working with various federal agencies to do, to help make sure we had test kits and manufacturing capacity, et cetera. And I just thought, that's really nothing I have any background or training in, much like everything else in my life. But somehow I'm playing a little tiny role in helping save the world.
I'd say you're an American hero.
I have a White House story that I'll fill you in on afterwards because I never tell it on mic about dealing with the previous administration that told me that, wow, everything we thought turned out to be true. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that stuff, keeps me gainfully employed. And even there, though, it was one thing to have Zoom meetings, like I was saying, and schedule things, but just being at a trade show in Frankfurt a couple of weeks ago in these huge halls and just going from company to company and just shooting the breeze with guys who I'd had emails with, we've asked questions, we've had conversations, but just the stuff that comes up when you're just hanging out. When you can do face to face, when, it's no longer a scheduled thing and just becomes a sort of impromptu talk. That's why the conversation chapter of your book was the one that resonated with me most.
I mean, there's just no substitute for human connection. And people ask me, what was the most surprising thing you learned about this book? What was the most surprising thing you found? And I'm like, the most surprising thing I found is that we assumed that all of this stuff would just totally work when we moved it online, that we could move our entire world online, all our conversations, all our spaces, and it wouldn't make a difference. And we were shocked when it didn't, right? We're like, I don't know. I had this Zoom cocktail party and it sucked. I wonder why.
Everybody had one Zoom cocktail party.
Exactly. I wonder why that is. Why did it suck? It's like, because this is, it's not meant to be like that. And then people go back to the thing like, I don't know, I went to this meeting. It was just a boring Monday meeting and it was so great. Why I'm surprised at how great it was. It's like, yeah, this is how you're meant to engage with the world. right? This is how you've evolved to do it. And so before it's like, oh God, Frankfurt, another pharma conference. My Lord, this is going to suck.
Don't get me wrong. Frankfurt's the most boring city in the world. And I was still looking forward to just getting to the Messe and doing my thing.
Yeah. You know, and yeah, I went to New York a few weeks before the book came out because I wanted to like press the flesh. I wanted to like talk to editors and meet people, and it was amazing. It was like we met and we talked and we caught up and we had ideas, and some of those ideas have turned into articles or coverage in papers or whatever. And it was just like, it was this natural flow of conversation of sort of being there versus like a transactional thing. Right? Can I get a phone call with you? Can I send you an email? Can I send you an idea? That's how we are. We're social creatures.
Yeah. So tell me about your writing life. Where to begin for you? I'm so sorry.
Where did it begin?
Yeah. At what point in your life did you say, man, I want to be a writer?
I mean, I always enjoyed writing stuff. I think the first thing I wrote was, you know, when I was like in my teens, and I wrote a column for the summer camp newspaper, Socks on the Beach. And you know, when I was in university, I really enjoyed writing papers and got into student journalism with the newspaper and the TV station there, and really realized that I wanted to be a journalist after graduating. So I got into it very early, like right from graduation pretty much, and was freelancing from the start because nobody would give me an actual job because I didn't have a journalism degree or much actual experience, and just kind of have fumbled my way through it in the 20 years since, and continue fumbling.
Oh, imposter syndrome is a great way to go through life. And I'll fill you in on stories about that when we're off mic too. So, you know, not being qualified and discovering, it turns out that's not as important as, you know, the skills that you're bringing or just the curiosity that you're bringing to a topic. That's, well, as you've demonstrated over the course of the career, that's absolutely critical to these things.
Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. So I don't know. It's a blessing. It's a curse. You know, this is the fifth book I've written, fifth book launch period. And each one is just this roller coaster of expectations, emotions, you know, validation, criticism, you know, wonderful connections and horrible letdowns. And each one just brings this, I don't know if it makes me better or, you know, more wise or richer or just more foolish, but I keep doing it. So there's obviously something there that I like. And I think it's like when you're able to do it, and especially with books, you're really just like given this untethered freedom to explore your ideas and express them in the way that you feel is most relevant. And no one really interferes with that. Like when you write a book versus an article for like a newspaper or something like that, the editorial direction is there to shape it, but it's not dictating it in a way that if I wrote a story for a magazine or a newspaper, you know, they're much more concerned about their voice than mine.
Sure.
And yeah, that's, you know, there's a luxury to that very few people get in the world.
And tell me about Toronto, because we haven't been up since spring of 2019. And as well, we would go up every year for a comics festival up there. And it's the only one my wife would accompany me to.
TCAF or whatever?
Yeah,
Chris
because
Butcher,
the restaurants.
Chris Butcher's comic festival.
Yeah, he's no longer part of it apparently, but we won't go into that on mic either.
I don't know,
but yeah, the restaurants up there absolutely amazing. Amy always loved coming, and now it's like, well, I guess 2023 we'll go back up. She checks to make sure our favorite restaurant is still open. El Tenedor, a few blocks north of the Reference Library, where TCAF is held. I'll zap you about it because it's this little tiny place. Tenedor, Spanish.
Really? Because I used to be on the be involved with the library a lot, and we would always do events there. And we'd always be like, "Where the hell do we eat around here?" Because it's either like garbage fast food or, you know, super super high end like restaurant in the Four Seasons, and it would always be a struggle to find a place.
Oh, this place is wonderful. Yeah, Tenador.ca.
Okay.
It's and according to the website, it still exists. Small, like maybe a dozen or 14 people can sit there. But one of the most wonderful meals we've ever had was in this place. And again, your book just totally, not the Toronto aspect of it so much as the thing you're not going to get from getting takeout. So it was just sitting there with the owner and the chef and just shooting the breeze. And I hadn't had a drink in 8 or 9 years, but they insisted you have to have a little wine with this.
Takeout or delivery at this point.
Fine food, especially.
Talking about, I was interviewing with someone who's like from Hong Kong, and I'm like, dim sum, there's nothing worse than takeout dim sum.
No,
right?
No. Everything just it glutes, it congeals.
Flaccid mess.
Yeah, nothing good. But yeah, so we're hoping to get up to Toronto. How's the city changed as you've observed? Has it been a lot of closures or things hanging on? How's the city really
like
evolved?
Most places. I mean, it certainly saw a change. The great restaurants, the great cultural places, they've remained, right? And other ones that were sort of always on the edge, we're going to be on the edge. It's a very expensive city. The real estate, until very recently, was like one of the most expensive anywhere in North America. That the housing price, the boom has now turned into a bit of a bust. And that was a 20-something year bubble. So you're seeing the effect of that. Maybe rents will come down. The city, marches on as the city marches on. And there's more delicious places to eat, and life is full again, and so the city is great, and all the issues that the city has about inaccessibility and affordability, and inequality and disparity, and the housing crisis and homelessness, those are real, and those aren't going away, and they're not going to be solved by some sort of quick overnight thing.
Smart city.
Yeah, exactly.
That Doctoroff thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't do that.
Well, let me tell you, in New York, we had our Doctoroff experience when he was working for Bloomberg as a deputy mayor. His job was to get the New York Jets stadium built on the upper, not on the Upper West Side, but more around Lincoln Center, like the west. Yeah, the Hudson Yards. Sort of Hudson Yards, just north of that. And the idea that they were going to drop 70,000 people into the middle of Manhattan for football games 8 days a year was... I'm a New York fireman and I believe in this. All these public service announcements trying to push for this, none of which realized the incredibly Byzantine New York state and city governance that meant that this one representative, Shelley Silver, who ended up going up for corruption, he blocked the entire thing, and he knew he could block the entire thing for years, and no one figured it out until the end.
It's like,
when he finally, unfortunately,
how are you in this job if you didn't read the Power Broker?
It was incredible, and it really got to that moment of, thank God I read Robert Caro. I know exactly where this is going to go, and he just no. Unfortunately, I represent the World Trade Centers area, and until that gets developed, we're not putting a stadium in the West 40s. And there was just that realization of, it'll never happen. Yeah. Okay, and then Doctoroff leaves, goes to Toronto to try to build your smart city, and as you've got that great quote from Shoshana Sachs in your book, there are things we need out of a city and there are things we need out of the internet, and those are not the same thing. It's remarkable, like we keep saying, how these tech companies keep thinking that their hammer is the thing that's going to solve all the nail problems out there.
The city of the future is the city of the past, just, with incremental changes in it that make it better, like New York and Toronto, with outdoor dining, which was for years, decades. People are like, hey, why can't I go to France and sit on a patio on a sidewalk, and I can't do that here in North America? And we're like, regulations, cars, there has to be a certain distance from the thing. It's like, we could do it. Actually, we could just do it. Yeah, it's not a problem.
It turns out
no one's
we just need some plywood.
Everything's fine, and actually it makes life better. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a thing to do, and it requires no new technology and very little infrastructure, and we were able to do it in, weeks.
Now, I do have to tell you the most troubling aspect of the book to me, which was in the dedication when you have the line, Forgive Me for Roth.
Yeah.
Because I thought this was potentially about me, but at the time I thought maybe it's going to be Philip Roth. And by chapter 6, it does become apparent that you were asking for forgiveness about Philip Roth and not time traveling about how bad this podcast is going to be.
As a human being and all the possible things that he's done or said. Just I picked for my book
just
club.
His book of the essays. You gave your book club the essays.
Man, I don't know. I was like searching. This was like 4 years ago for a pick for book club, and I wanted something comedic but thoughtful. And I was like, oh, Roth. I'm like, oh, but maybe nonfiction. And then I read some David Remnick thing in the New Yorker reviewing this wonderful collection of Philip Roth essays and his intellect and wit. And I was like, oh, great. And as soon as I ordered it from the bookstore, and I'm like, I need it for book club. And they're like, okay, it's a special order. It's $60. And I'm like, oh, it's like, yeah, it's a special edition. And I think I read within like the first one. I'm like, guys, don't bother. Like, just read these 3 things. It was unreadable. And I enjoy Philip Roth's novels. And it was just, yeah. So forgive me. I will. Yeah. Everyone in the book club has their low point pick and their high point pick. Yeah. So
do you have a favorite Roth? A favorite Philip Roth book as opposed to a favorite Roth that you might be talking to right now?
Roth is, yeah, right here. My favorite Philip Roth book. Plot Against America. I mean, I remember reading that. I read it in the Rio de Janeiro airport, waiting for a flight back to Argentina, where I was living at the time. And I was so engrossed in the book that I missed my flight.
Oh, wow. I've comparable experience. I read Exit Ghost while waiting on a 7-hour delay for a flight home from Belfast. It was on my Kindle, so I was able to just keep reading and reading and reading. The other one was reading Plot Against America, which I think I did while my old man was in quintuple bypass surgery in the hospital. And I was just sitting in the waiting room like, well, I was going to tackle this book at some point. May as well just dive in now. And, 6 or 7 hours later, I managed to make it through, as did he. So,
Yeah, sure.
But we have those reading experiences, though. But tell me what you're reading lately. Which I did warn you was coming.
Nice, you did warn me it was coming. It's true. I have been reading a good amount of John le Carré. My friends Jake and Nathan turned me on to him last year, and I'd never read him. I'm about to tell you the exact same story. Amor Towles, the guy who did The Gentleman from Moscow novel. I loved his books, actually.
Turns me on to Le Carré because his reading group was doing all of the Smiley novels.
Yes.
So I thought, let me dive in. And the first 2 are terrible because they're pre The Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
The first one I actually picked up. I was at my mother-in-law's house. My father-in-law or someone had it. What was it? A Matter of...
There's a Murder of Quality.
And then
which was mad. I think The Looking Glass War was next.
Yeah. So I enjoyed it. It was so slim. I was like, okay, I like this. And then, once you get into like Tinker Tailor.
Yeah. Once again, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, then it really...
that was just like masterful. That's in. I just read a less than... Like I'm just finishing Our Game, which is like a early 90s post... USSR one, and it's one of the only ones I'm like, this, I cannot stand this. Like I just hate the way it's like written, but I'm still reading it. So
I've only done the Smiley ones, as well as his, I think I read the memoir / collection, in the last year or 2. But Towles turned me on to it. I swear to God, it was, I just plowed through like 9 of these Smiley novels in the span of 2 months. I was like, wow. Yeah, it turns out he's a lot better writer than I thought.
My God.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a master. I mean, a true master.
And not just spy, just, a novelist. Yeah. I was just floored.
And the Britishisms, I mean, you just get lost in it. It's so wonderful and dour and gray and sullen.
Yeah. So I've turned my wife on to Mick Herron's Slow Horses novel and the TV show. And I said, the thing you really get out of Le Carré, especially the novels in the 70s, was just the material shittiness. Like just how run down everything was and how understaffed and under-resourced and the cigarette burns on the carpet, just everything, just kind of falling into disrepair, even at the highest levels of
a real circus.
The intelligence world.
Real circus.
Yeah. So that's your major reading?
That's what I've been reading lately. In terms of nonfiction, I'm actually in the midst of a book by a friend of mine, Jody Rosen. It's called Two Wheels Good. It's a social history of the bicycle. It came out, I think it came out in June. I bought it for my dad, who's a big biker. And then I saw his copy the other day, and I picked it up, and it's great. Like, it's, history as social commentary, as an eye onto the world through something as simple and ubiquitous and beautiful and controversial as bicycles. And it's awesome. I'm really loving it.
I should ask the jinx of a question. Next book?
I don't know.
Okay.
Not set yet. So toying around with different ideas, and hopefully I'll be back to talk about it, whatever it is. And
my hope is we'll be able to do it in person.
Amen. Here at El Tenedor, the Fort.
I will come up and I will pay for the meal for that one, because that's God. Once you get there, you'll have the holy crap. How did I miss this place?
I'm going to look it up as soon as we're done this interview.
There is something to be said for that analog world, man.
It's the only world we have. I think we have to remember that.
Yeah. So thanks so much for coming on. Like I say, it sucks that we have to do it virtually, but we'll see our faces next time.
Amen.
And that was David Sachs. Go check out his new book, The Future is Analog, from Public Affairs. It's a really good exploration of the promises and shortfalls of the digital world and how we can find meaning in the physical one. You should also visit David's site, saxdavid.com, for more about his writing, his book tour, his speaking engagements, articles, and other stuff. And he's also on Twitter as SaxDavid. In both instances, it is SaxDavid. I'll have links to that in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support the Virtual Memory Show by telling other people about it. Just to let them know there's this podcast that comes out every week with really interesting conversations with fascinating cultural figures, sometimes twice a week. I'm going back to once a week now because of Thanksgiving, but we'll see how the rest of the year goes. Now, you can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email, direct message if we're connected on one of those social media things, postcards. I love postcards, letters, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number. And that's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you go longer than that and get cut off, just call back and leave the rest of your message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something really interesting to share with the listeners, but I would never include something like that without the speaker's permission. So if you do leave me a message, let me know if it's cool to share. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, I do just fine with my day job. I'm going to launch a Substack soon that's going to have a paid tier, but that's mainly to pay for itself because I'm going to be using it to pay for transcribing and editing some of my past episodes and sharing that with the higher tier people. Anyway, if you do have money to spare, give it to other people or institutions. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato Go, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. There are people who need help with rent, with medical bills, especially other sorts of bills that come up in our lives, or just launching a creative project. So there's lots of things you can do to help people out that way. When it comes to institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank every month. I occasionally donate to the Poor People's Campaign. There are freedom funds, election funds, Planned Parenthood, Women's Choice funds. You can make targeted campaign donations. In the U.S., we've got the election for the runoff election in Georgia coming up in a couple of weeks, and you can always donate to either of the candidates, especially Reverend Warnock. But anyway, there's a lot of things you can do to try to help us build a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/May4th. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.